Hi, everyone. I'm Dinah Polonitz. I'm one of the co-founders at the Hill Street Country Club in downtown Oceanside. We're inside the Linkso building in downtown area, so they're our major partners in the artist community down here in Oceanside. And so I'm very grateful today that some of you guys made time to hang out with us during this lunch hour to discuss some important opportunities for BIPOC artists and art organizations and leaders with Leticia Franco Gomez and Gomez Franco, I'm so sorry, got it backwards. But we're going to be discussing, as a small art organization here in Oceanside, the Hill Street Country Club started as a DIY space. We used the money that came from our jobs to start our business and our organization. It took a lot of partnerships within our community, local businesses, local institutions such as the Oceanside Public Library. In the beginning, it was the Oceanside Museum of Art. So we had to learn how to maneuver in creating a space for ourselves with very limited funds. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to share what we're learning in our growth as an organization to better understanding how to get money from the city, the state, and also from like local grants. So this is like one step and another opportunity for us to learn that it's not that hard. We just got to be very creative in how we apply for certain city funding and grants, and better understanding about how to make smart fiscal agent partnerships. Like we're a small organization, so if you're an artist or a teaching artist and you're looking for an institution or organization that shares your standards and values, don't be afraid to go to your small nonprofit that is out here just there's like one or two persons running it, wearing many hats. Don't be afraid to partner with us and figure out how we can be a fiscal agent partner with you. And so the best thing about Leticia, she's going to break it all down. And we're very excited. She's coming from the city of San Diego. So it's like a big deal for us to have like a legit person in here who knows about funding. So hi, Leticia, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
All right. I think I unmuted myself. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share with you all the current opportunities available with the city. I think my main goal for this season, this funding season, and doing outreach and technical assistance is really to demystify a lot of the process, demystify a lot of the application and the procedures and all of that stuff. And to address a lot of misconceptions and misinformation about who's eligible for funding or who can take advantage of these resources. So I'm going to do first like a super brief introduction to the three current opportunities that are open, and then we can have a discussion if you guys have specific questions about any of the opportunities. This presentation has a little bit of an emphasis on fiscal sponsorship because this is particular for organizations that are outside of the city of San Diego, and how you can make use of city of San Diego funds is through fiscal sponsorships. So I'll get into all of those, and then we can have an open dialogue, and I can address some of your questions and some of your curiosities about how this works. I will say, as the photo on here shows, I am leaving my post at the city of San Diego in 2 weeks from today to be the new executive director at the Balboa Art Conservation Center. But I will continue as I did long before I got to the city to support the arts in San Diego, and really to continue pushing for a lot of our kind of smaller organizations and communities that haven't historically had access to these funds to be able to access these funds. So I'll continue. I'll always be accessible to help and advocate and support in however I can. Should I share my presentation so that I can move forward?
I'm going to make you a co-host right now. Make you the host so you can share your screen. Okay.
So we'll start. So this is Get Yours. Thank you, Dinah and Hill Street Country Club for inviting me to talk about our funding opportunities and then to answer any and all of your questions regarding city funding or just funding in particular, how to apply for grants, how to apply for funds, how to use fiscal sponsors. So we'll move it. So just to clarify, Leticia Gomez Franco, I am the Senior Arts and Culture Funding Manager for the City of San Diego, specifically for the Commission for Arts and Culture. If you're not familiar with the Commission for Arts and Culture in San Diego, our mission is to vitalize the community by integrating arts and culture into community life, supporting the region's cultural assets, and showcasing San Diego as an international cultural tourism destination. And our vision is to expand our world by celebrating creativity in San Diego. There are two major funding opportunities that have been around for as long as the commission has been around, since the 80s, that are kind of like our anchor funding programs. Basically, the commission invests all of its TOT allocation into these two categories of funding, and I'm going to go through those. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about a one-time opportunity that we have now. But then I'll talk a little bit about the significance of this opportunity, where it comes from, and how in particular this makes the Commission for Arts and Culture a little bit more accessible countywide. So I'll talk a little bit about our relationship with the California Arts Council and how those funds that come to the Commission from the California Arts Council are really meant to be used regionally. So we'll start with our two anchor funding categories, and that is OSP and CCSD. OSP is the Organizational Support Program. This is basically general operating support to San Diego arts and culture nonprofit organizations. This one's pretty, the boundaries of this are pretty rigid. It's meant for 501c3s or 501c6 that have a primary function of arts and culture. These organizations have to be located in the city of San Diego or have to make a pretty good case about how the majority of their programs and services benefit San Diego residents. And this is all part of the application. So OSP allows for general operating support for nonprofits. If you've done development or grant writing work before, you know that it is very rare to find an opportunity that offers general operating support, because usually funding opportunities are tied to a specific project with specific deliverables. This is for general operating support, which means that it's meant to pay your lights, to pay your space, to pay your salaries, to pay your employees, to pay your marketing, to pay any kind of general operating expenses that the organization has. So this is really valuable opportunity. Typical types of applicants that are in this funding pool are, San Diego's major theaters, museums, dance, music, heritage and cultural, and art service organizations. There's really big organizations in OSP, but there's also really small organizations in OSP that have a primary arts and culture focus and are in and of themselves 501c3s. The focus in OSP is on the delivery of arts and culture programs and services that engage residents and visitors and that have an impact on San Diego's quality of life and tourism. I'll get, in a couple of slides, I'll get to why the tourism keeps coming up in a lot of the language that we use. The second funding opportunity is Creative Community San Diego, and that's CCSD. This funding opportunity provides support for projects such as community-based festivals, parades, exhibits, and celebrations. These are projects that promote neighborhood pride and community reinvestment, make arts and culture activities more available and accessible in San Diego neighborhoods, and encourage people of diverse backgrounds to share their heritage and culture. CCSD allows for project-specific support for nonprofits. So unlike OSP, which is general operating support, CCSD is tied to specific projects. The organizations that are applying for CCSD do not have to be arts nonprofits. So this is a perfect opportunity for, say, a health service agency that has an art therapy weekend event, or a social service agency that has year-round arts programming, or arts nonprofits that do particular art projects, or arts nonprofits that do year-round programming but are not located in the city of San Diego. So this is a perfect opportunity for, say, an organization based in Oceanside who wants to have an exhibition in partnership with La Casa Familiar in San Isidro. So you are putting your artists together, you're putting an exhibition together, you're going to be using a space in the city of San Diego. So you can apply for CCSD to help support this one project. And it doesn't matter that your organization is not inside of the city because your project is inside of the city. So typical types of projects that make use of CCSD funding are festivals, parades, celebrations, and exhibitions. One thing that we want to stress for FY22, we know that there aren't enough, and I don't know if there ever will be, but there practically aren't any opportunities for individual artists right now. There are some opportunities through the public art program for art commissions, but as far as funding for individual artists, the city currently doesn't have enough of this. So CCSD funds can be used by individual artists or artist collaboratives to put on projects and programs that will have some benefit. So if you look at the CCSD application, if you look at the RFP, and we'll get into that in a little bit, you'll see the kinds of questions that you'll have to answer. And these are mostly regarding like impact, who your audience is, what kind of impact you're having, what kind of role that audience plays in defining these programs. So the reason I'm saying this is because if you're coming at this as an individual artist, and let's say you wanted to help, you were looking for funding to complete a series of paintings that you're working on, you may not be able to fulfill the criteria of CCSD funding. So who's going to be your audience for these paintings that you're working on? Is there a public interface? Like, are you engaging communities? Are you activating spaces? Who's your team, the capacity? So all these kinds of questions that are in the RFP, you would have to answer. And just getting a peek at those questions would allow you to gauge whether, okay, should I request for funding to finish the series of portraits that I'm working on as an artist, or maybe for the part of this program or a part of this project where I'm done with these paintings and I want to collaborate with other artists to have an exhibition in a public space so that the community can come and engage with these paintings. So it'll kind of help guide what part of your entire process is a better fit for requesting these funds. Something particular of CCSD, again, is that it allows for fiscal sponsorships. OSP does not allow for fiscal sponsorships. CCSD, if you're a project producer, an artist collaborative, but you do not have your own 501c3 or 501c6, you can still apply for fiscal for funding through a fiscal sponsor. So that means you're teaming up with a 501c3 or 501c6, and you're asking them to be the fiscal sponsor of your project, and you would submit together an application for CCSD funding. And I'll get into fiscal sponsorships in a little bit. And both OSP and CCSD are currently open. The application for OSP and CCSD, the first part of the application, which is the RFQ, is due this Friday, November 13th. And this is the FY22 funding application is for projects and programs that are happening between July 1st of 2021 and June 30th of 2022. So this is for, you're applying for projects that are happening that far into the future. The third funding opportunity that we have open right now, which is a one-time opportunity, is the CARES Grant Initiative. So the CARES Grant Initiative, unlike OSP and CCSD, which is for funding for things that are happening in FY22, this is for things that are happening now. So these are funds that are immediately available. These are relief funds from the CARES Act that have basically were given to the NEA. The NEA gave them to the California Arts Council. The California Arts Council distributed their share amongst all their state and local partners. That the Commission for Arts and Culture is the designated state and local partner for the San Diego region. So we got our share of those funds, and now we are distributing to organizations based in San Diego County. This is funding that will be available now and should be used by January 31st of 2021. The CARES Grant Initiative distributes one-time relief grants for general operating support to eligible San Diego County arts and culture organizations serving communities of color disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we know the communities of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. These funds are meant to provide some relief to these kind of BIPOC organizations serving BIPOC communities. This is open to all of San Diego County, unlike OSP and CCSD, which is kind of focused on City of San Diego region, or the City of San Diego. It's open to organizations in San Diego County that are serving communities of color, deliberately and intentionally serving communities of color. Preference will be given to organizations that intentionally serve BIPOC communities that didn't receive FY21 OSP and CCSD funding. And this is because we are trying to not only reach out to organizations that haven't already been in our funding pool, but also provide some kind of relief to organizations who aren't already receiving funding from the city. That doesn't mean that if you are receiving funding from the city now, you cannot apply. It just means that preference will be given to organizations who have not received funding. These are relief funds, so there's no match. OSP and CCSD have a match requirement, which we'll get to later. The funds are awarded upfront and not on a reimbursement basis like OSP and CCSD. And fiscal sponsors are also allowed for the CARES Grant initiative. The fiscal sponsorship for CARES Grant is a little bit different than for CCSD. For example, in the CARES Grant initiative, you should be a nonprofit arts and culture organization. So this is not an opportunity that is meant for individual artists, nor is it an opportunity that is meant for for-profit arts and culture organizations. This would be a nonprofit arts and culture organization or an arts and culture organization that functions like a nonprofit, and this would be evident in, you have some kind of a board of directors or some kind of overseeing body. Your budget and your mission are similar to that of a nonprofit organization, but you don't have 501c3 designation. There are organizations who have California status as nonprofits, but don't have federal 501c3 status. And there are organizations who don't have California nonprofit status, who just function as nonprofits, but don't have 501c3. A really good example that I can think of is like the Chicano Park Steering Committee. The Chicano Park Steering Committee functions like a nonprofit. They have a governing board, they have meetings, they have their budgets, they have their kind of programs, but they themselves do not have a 501c3. So this would be an organization that could apply to the CARES Grant initiative by partnering up with Via International, for example, who's their fiscal sponsor for CCSD. Grant funds must be expended by January 31st. And CARES applicants who are eligible to apply are encouraged to apply for FY22 OSP and CCSD. Like OSP and CCSD, the application for the CARES Grant Initiative is also due this Friday, November 13th. This application is very different from OSP and CCSD. OSP and CCSD has a RFQ, RFP, two-phase application process. The CARES Grant Initiative is a one-time short kind of a quick application. You're not proposing a project, you're basically establishing your need and you're establishing your role in communities of color. Something that's important for CARES Grant Initiative is that your organization isn't just serving communities of color, but it is deeply rooted in communities of color, evidenced by the communities of color that you serve being reflected in your boards and your staff. So this is really it's a small grant opportunity. But the focus is really to try to help some of these organizations that have been denied or have not had access to these kinds of resources from other more kind of institutional opportunities. So where do the funds come from and how big are the funding awards? For OSP and CCSD, the Commission receives a portion of the city's transient occupancy tax, or TOT tax, which is paid by tourists and other visitors to San Diego, or when we have a staycation. Basically, anytime you stay in a hotel, you pay a tax. That tax feeds the TOT revenues, and then from there, they are distributed amongst different programs in the city. And the Commission for Arts and Culture has OSP and CCSD, both which are fully funded through transient occupancy tax. Which can be greatly impacted, for example, right now, when because of COVID, TOT tax has been impacted. Therefore, our portion of that was also impacted. So there was a huge difference between what we received as an allocation for FY21 from what we received in FY20. And that was reflected in the size of awards that organizations received this year, which were reduced by about half. Awards are calculated taking the following factors into consideration. So this is a big demystifying opportunity, just talking about how awards are calculated. A lot of organizations, a lot of other funding opportunities, you get to request an amount. So if you're having a project and your project is a $20,000 budget project, you get to request $10,000 for funding. And then depending on how good your application is and how much funding that source has, they'll give you a certain amount of whatever you requested, 100% if you scored perfectly, and then down from there depending on how you scored. Our funding process does not work like that. You do not request an amount. Basically, you submit your budget, and your budget is your request. You're basically telling the city, I'm putting on a project, it's gonna cost me X amount, and then that X amount is one factor in three factors that we take into consideration when calculating the award. It is the biggest factor, the size of your budget. The other factors are the rank that you receive in your panel. So when you complete your RFP and you put in all your narrative, that goes to the panel process. The panel reviews the applications and gives it a rank. The higher that rank, the higher a percentage of your award will be given to you. The lower that rank, the less of a percentage of your award will be given to you. And then the third factor is how much money is allocated to the programs and how many awards are eligible for funding. So for example, in FY20, the Commission for Arts and Culture received about $11.4 million from TOT to feed OSP and CCSD. Of that, about 10 million was put into OSP and about 1 million was put into CCSD. So you have $1 million in CCSD and you had about 50 organizations that were eligible for funding. So that $1 million, 100% of that $1 million is then distributed to 100% of the organizations that were deemed eligible for funding. And how much those awards are then depend on the budget. So organizations with bigger budgets will receive a larger award. So we use an algorithm. There's a curve built into that algorithm so that the bigger the budget is, the smaller a percentage of that budget will be awarded. So if you have a budget of $30,000, your award may be $5,000. So then you would be receiving, I should have used an easier number. If you have a budget of $20,000 and you receive $5,000, then you're getting 25% of your budget as an award. But if your budget is $10 million, you'll only be getting about 1% of your budget, which will still be a lot, right? It'll be maybe like $100,000, but it'll be a very small percentage of your overall budget. So the bigger the budget, the smaller a percentage of that budget will be awarded, but also the bigger the budget, the bigger your award will be. So it's not that complicated of an algorithm, but we do have an explanation for how our algorithm works if you're into that stuff on our website. But that's a good demystifying opportunity because a lot of organizations don't understand how the funding is awarded and will come into this process expecting a certain amount of money or thinking that they can request a certain amount of money or just not understanding once awards are allocated why they got $5,000 and this other organization receives $50,000. And the reason for that is probably because your budget was $15,000 and their budget was $500,000. So all of those things are taken into account. Generally speaking, OSP funding awards can range from $5,000 to $600,000. That's on a good year pre-COVID. And CCSD funding awards can range from $5,000 to $140,000. Our minimum award is $5,000, so you won't receive less than that. And CGI, CARES Grant Initiative, is a one-time special grant initiative in response to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Again, this is funded through the CARES Act, federal funds that went through the NEA, they went to the California Arts Council, and then went to the state local partners. There will be 10 awards of $1,500 distributed through the CARES Grant Initiative. Again, this is a quick grant application. This is meant specifically for organizations, arts and culture nonprofits, serving organizations of color, communities of color that are rooted in communities of color. There aren't too many organizations that are both serving communities of color and rooted in communities of color. So if you are one of them, I do encourage you to apply. This again is county-wide. So if you are in North County or National City or in Spring Valley or Lemon Grove, you're eligible to apply for this funding. So if you are one of those organizations or know someone who is, or maybe, do encourage them to apply or reach out to me and I can help guide them through that process. So the schedule of opportunities, OSP and CCSD guidelines were released October 12th. They will be due November 13th. And the CARES Grant Initiative will also be due November 13th. The CARES Grant Initiative will be scored and ranked immediately after the submittal of applications, because the goal is to have awarded organizations notified by like the end of November. So this will be a super quick turnaround. OSP and CCSD is completely different. This is a pretty long, stretched out application process. So your request for qualifications will be due November 13th. In November through February, RFQs are scored. In November, December, RFQs are scored. If your RFQ is deemed qualified, then in January, we open up the platform to submit your RFP. And then in February, your RFP is due. In March, panels convene to review the RFPs and give them ranks. And then those ranks are used for award calculations, and that happens between April and June. And this is because in April and June, or May and June, is when the city's going through its budget process. So it isn't until May that we receive a tentative amount of how much funding is going to be allocated to OSP and CCSD. So by the time the mayor and city council decide this is how much money is in the TOT fund, this is how much we're going to allocate to the arts, we've already gone through our entire application process, and then we already know all the ranks and are just waiting for that final number so that we can begin allocating and calculating awards and distributing funds amongst the organizations that were deemed eligible. And then the contract period for FY22 begins July 1st, 2021 and ends on June 30th, 2022. Again, the CGI schedule, like I just mentioned, application was released October 12th. The applications will be due November 13th, this Friday at 5 p.m. Immediately after they're submitted, applications will be evaluated and awards will be announced by the end of November. And then the deadline to use the fund is January 31st, 2021. You can find all of the guidelines and application links for all three opportunities on our website. At the Commission for Arts and Culture, you go to the funding tab, and then there's a tab for CCSD, for OSP, and for CARES. Applications are submitted online via our online application platform. We use GoSmart, and all three of the applications are submitted through the same platform. So you can open one account for your organization, and you would have access to all of the applications. So now we'll take a little bit more of a look at OSP and CCSD. I am going to assume, are there any organizations here that are eligible for OSP? So this would be a nonprofit arts and culture organization that is a primary arts and culture organization. I'm going to assume that most of us here are mostly eligible for CCSD and for CARES. So because of that, I'll do a little bit more emphasis on CARES and CCSD, but if you have questions or you want me to talk a little bit more about OSP, I can definitely do that. Okay, there it is. So the mission alignment for both OSP and CCSD. For OSP, this is in regards to your organization as a whole, and for CCSD, this is in regards to your project. So your organization or your project should fulfill a mission that aligns with the purpose of Arts and Culture and Community Festivals category of TOT funding, which is to enhance the economy, to contribute to San Diego's international reputation as a cultural destination, to provide access to excellence in culture and the arts for residents and visitors, to enrich the lives of the people of San Diego, and to build healthy, vital neighborhoods. Our application process for OSP and CCSD is a two-phase application process. First, we have the RFQ, and that is what is due this Friday on the 13th. The RFQ allows the city to evaluate if an organization is eligible to apply. So we're looking at all the eligibility criteria and that your organization or your fiscal sponsor meets it. And the RFP, the second phase, which happens in January, February, is the big narrative part of the application. And this allows the city to evaluate the degree to which each applicant's programs and services align with the city's goals. The RFQ, again, assesses if an applicant is eligible. At the end of the RFQ phase, you're either deemed qualified or not qualified. Some of the criteria that we look at in the RFQ is that you eligibility requirements, that there's accountability through governance and financial practice, and that your organization has the bandwidth to manage the details of a city contract. The RFQ is evaluated by our partners at the University of San Diego. So this is an outside team of nonprofit financial experts, and they're trained specifically in City of San Diego contracting processes. So we team up with them, so city staff and USD. Together, we evaluate all of the criteria in the RFQ and then assess whether an organization is qualified or not qualified to contract with the city. If you're initially deemed not qualified to contract with the city because maybe you forgot to submit your organizational chart, or maybe it showed that when you did your financial portion of your RFQ, we assess how much liquidity your organization has. Maybe you came under the minimum 1 month of liquidity, and we want to hear a little bit more. So you may originally be deemed not qualified, but we do have a process called the cure process, or the cure phase, which comes between the RFQ and the RFP. And this is basically an opportunity for organizations who have been deemed not qualified to work one-on-one with city staff to address any issues in your RFQ. So if we had additional questions regarding your eligibility, or you didn't submit your 501c3 letter, there is an opportunity for you to fix that. It's a 5-day period. I think this year it's going to happen like first week or second week of January. And you'll basically be hearing from city staff. Somebody will say, hi, your application was deemed not qualified because you forgot to upload your organizational chart. And then you'll say, oops, sorry, my bad. And then you'll go back into your GoSmart. You'll upload your organizational chart. City staff will review it, and they'll say, okay, that looks good. You have now been deemed qualified. And then you're ready to move on to the RFP. So it's important to note that the RFQ November 13th deadline is not the kind of at-all, end-all of the RFQ process. You do still have an opportunity to work with staff to remedy issues in the RFQ. The RFP is, again, the process for assessing how well the programs and services that you are proposing align with city's goals. And some of the things that we're looking at in the RFP are what programs and services you're proposing. So if you're a CCSD applicant, what is your project? And if you're an OSP applicant, then what are the programs and services that your organization produces? A really important part of this application phase is the community engagement portion of it. So this is basically where we find out who your audience is, who you're doing these programs for, how this audience, what role this audience has in kind of defining your programs. How do you know that they're being impacted by these programs? What kind of accessibility and equity things are you doing to ensure that your programs have a diverse attendance? So this is like the impact and the reason for your programming. This is an important part of this part of the application. We're also looking at organizational capacity, and then everybody answers an emphasis area. So this is like 5 different options where I think one of them is that your project or your organization has made great strides in kind of getting national and international reputation for San Diego, or has increased tourism, or has reached out to historically underserved communities. So this is, you get to pick one emphasis area and talk about how your project or your services align with it. And then if you're a CCSD applicant, your RFP also includes your budget. So you submit a proposed budget for the project that you are going to be having in FY22, and you break it down by your income and expenses, and you include all the notes about what your project budget consists of. New for FY22, because of FY21 and COVID, we added questions about virtual programming. So in the past, virtual programming wasn't obviously generally in our lives at the rate that it is now, but it also wasn't included in as part of a allowed kind of programming, only because there's such a huge emphasis on reaching out to San Diego residents and visitors. In FY22, we were able to add a question in the RFP for both OSP and CCSD regarding virtual programming and how your organization is using this and how you're making sure that San Diego audiences are benefiting from your programs, even through virtual programming. We also added a question about diversity and equity. And this is, we're really excited to find out what kind of work you've done in the space of equity as the city itself, and the Commission for Arts and Culture kind of delves in deeper with a lot of the equity work that is long overdue. On our end, we also kind of are using this as an opportunity to catch up and get to learn from our cultural partners what equity work you have been doing, so that we can all move forward into FY22 and 23 and 24 in a more equitable way. So these are two new kind of program areas that we included into the FY22 application. And the RFP is evaluated by commission advisory panels. These are composed of diverse members of the San Diego community and experienced local and national arts and nonprofit professionals. Panels occur in March and are open to the public, and applicants are encouraged to attend. For FY22, these panels are going to be taking place online, virtually, so they should be a little bit more accessible. Sorry. So some contracting requirements for FY22. We have a matching requirement that has recently been lowered. It used to be 3-to-1 and 2-to-1 for CCSD with smaller project budgets. That has been lowered across the board to 1-to-1. So now OSP organizations have a 1-to-1 matching requirement. CCSD projects have a 1-to-1 matching requirement. But if your project budget is $30,000 or under, you can use 50%. You can use in kind to match up to 50% of that match. So that's helpful, particularly for project budgets with smaller projects. With smaller budgets. So if your project budget is $10,000, for example, you'll receive $5,000 from the city, and then you'll have to match it with $5,000, but $2,500 of that can be in kind. So these are donated goods and services, your project partners. Maybe you have someone who's doing your marketing as a volunteer, or you're having an exhibition and you're going to have a DJ, and that DJ is DJing for free. So you quantify the value of that service that is part of your budget. So these are expenses that you would otherwise be making. So you're able to use $2,500 of the quantified value of donated goods and services to meet half of your match. Other requirements are that funds must be used during the contract period. So that's July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. All contractors are expected to comply with the city's insurance requirements. The city has kind of general liability, auto, and workers' comp insurance. These apply to some of these apply to some of them apply to all. For example, if you don't have any employees, then you don't need to have workers' compensation. If you don't own a vehicle, then you don't need to have auto insurance for owned vehicles. So there's waivers for that. And all of this stuff is due during the contracting period in August. So this is after you've received an award um, and you receive your contract. As part of the contract execution process, you would submit your proof of insurance. But it's included in the RFQ just to make sure that you understand that these are some of the expectations coming in. We also have required registrations. So your organization or your fiscal sponsor, if you're applying through a fiscal sponsor, has to be up to date with their Department of Justice registration, with their federal SAM registration, and their Secretary of State registration. And again, proof of all of this is due during contracting in August of 2021. For some of these, in particular the Department of Justice, they take forever to update their registrations. So it's always good as you're going through your RFQ to just do a quick check with the DOJ to make sure that your status is current and up to date. Because if it isn't, it can take them months to get it up to date. So that way you'll make sure that by August you're you're good and ready to go to submit your proof. And something important to note as you're going into this, funds are processed on a reimbursement basis. So this basically means that you are expected to have incurred and paid for the expenses before you can ask the city to reimburse you. This is a big part of why in the RFQ, when we have the whole financial section, we're looking to see that your organization has enough liquidity to cover funds upfront. So part of the really, what seems to be a complicated calculation, it's not so complicated and we can walk you through it. We're basically asking you to take your annual expenses, divide them by 12 so we know what your monthly expenses are, and then looking at your assets to see how much liquid assets you have, kind of currently in the bank, to see how many months of expenses worth you're able to cover upfront. And all we ask to meet the minimum requirement is that you have 1 month of expenses that are coverable. And if your expenses are below 1 month, and we understand that this kind of LUNA calculation that we use doesn't necessarily apply to all organizations. Some, for example, that are project-based, an organization that maybe exists year-round, but exists year-round to have one project in February will not have typical finances where they have monthly expenses that are stretched out over 12 months. The vast majority of their expenses and their vast majority of their expenses will happen in January, February, and the bulk of their income will come in January, February. So these are different organizations that maybe the LUNA calculation doesn't easily apply to. So you may end up with less than 1 month of liquidity. And all you have to do at that point is explain that we have enough funds. We just receive all of our funds in December in preparation for our February event. And we're always able to cover all of our expenses. So it is, at the end of the day, it is kind of people reading these applications on the other side. And there's an opportunity to include narrative with all of these questions so that you can explain the particular case that your organization is going through and how maybe this particular formula that we are using does or does not apply to your own kind of finances. So what if I produce arts and culture project but don't have a 501c3 or 501c6 status? Can I apply to CCSD? Yes, CCSD allows for fiscal sponsorship. So if you're seeking funding for an art project but are not a 501c3 or 501c6, you can still apply for CCSD funding via a fiscal sponsor. So what is a fiscal sponsor? Fiscal sponsorship is a formal agreement in which a 501c3 public charity sponsors a project that may lack exempt status. This alternative to starting your own nonprofit allows you to seek grants and solicit tax-deductible donations under your sponsor's exempt status. In essence, the fiscal sponsor serves as the administrative home of the cause. Charitable contributions are given to the fiscal sponsor, which then grants them to support the cause. So your fiscal sponsor would be the applicant on paper. They would be submitting the RFQ under their name, and they're basically proposing a project that is your project if you're the project producer. The relationship between the project producer and the fiscal sponsor is yours to decide. So we don't tell you, you have to pay your fiscal sponsor this percentage, or your fiscal sponsor has to do this and you have to do that. we can provide some guidance, and I will in a couple of slides. I'll show you what part of the application belongs, is informed by the fiscal sponsor, and which part of the application is informed by the project producer. But at the end of the day, we have a whole gamut of relationships between fiscal sponsors and project producers, and it really is about you finding a fiscal sponsor who best fits your needs and respects, how much autonomy you want to have with your project. Some fiscal sponsor project producer relationships are kind of so symbiotic that you don't know. It really kind of seems like the fiscal sponsor is hiring the project producer to plan this event because they're so integrated. And some are very separated, so that the fiscal sponsor is just more of a transactional, I'm going to let you use my 501c3. You are there, the insurance and all of that stuff is going to be under the fiscal sponsor's name, but everything is very detached, that the project producer is handling all the budgets and all of the reporting and all of that stuff. So that really is between you and your fiscal sponsor to figure out what relationship of that works best for you. The role of the fiscal sponsor as far as our application process goes is really the RFQ. Most of the information you'll provide in the RFQ will pertain to the fiscal sponsor. So because the fiscal sponsor is the applicant on record and therefore responsible for fulfilling the contractual obligations, the information collected in the RFQ pertains to the fiscal sponsor. So when we're asking about eligibility, like is your organization a 501c3, we're asking about your fiscal sponsor. When we're asking about governance, how many times does your board meet? Does your board approve of executive director salaries? All of that stuff, that's all about your fiscal sponsor. There's only like 1 or 2 questions that may pertain to the project producer, and that's like when we ask for 2 sentences that describes your project and whether you are applying as a fiscal sponsor, and if so, describe the relationship between your fiscal sponsor and the project producer, kind of thing. Everything else in the RFQ is directly about the fiscal sponsor. Financial information, budgets, all of that stuff is about the fiscal sponsor. Org charts, board lists, all of that is about the fiscal sponsor. Once you get through the RFQ and you get into the RFP, most of the information you'll provide in the RFP will pertain to the project and the project producer. So the RFP will assess the strength of your project and how closely it aligns with city priorities by asking you specifically about the proposed project, the community engagement, your team's capacity to produce a project, and your project budget. And more than likely, that's information that the project producer will be able to inform, as opposed to the fiscal sponsor, who may not be as integrated or as knowledgeable about your actual project as you are. So this is kind of how you would typically divide the workload for the application process. RFQ would be heavy on the fiscal sponsor, and RFP would be heavy on the project producer. Just a little quick kind of details about what a fiscal sponsor does and does not have to be. A fiscal sponsor does have to be a 501c3 or 501c6. They do have to have that 501c3 for at least 3 years. They have to be fiscally solvent, and again, this basically means they have 1 month of liquidity. And they have to be deemed qualified for contracting via the RFQ process, which basically includes the 3 bullets I just talked about. And they have to not already be applying for TOT funds. So if you're looking for a fiscal sponsor, that fiscal sponsor shouldn't already be in our funding pool, because each organization can only apply for 1 project. So you wouldn't go to the San Diego Museum of Art, for example, and ask them to be your fiscal sponsor, because chances are they're already receiving Commission for Arts and Culture funds. Some things your fiscal sponsor does not have to be is they do not have to be an arts organization. So they just have to have a 501c3. So this could be like the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, Chicano Federation, any 501c3, any nonprofit that you know of who's not already applying for funds could be your fiscal sponsor. And they do not have to be located in the city of San Diego, because for CCSD, you could be located outside of the city of San Diego as long as your project is taking place in the city of San Diego. So basically, your fiscal sponsor could be located anywhere else. They don't have to be an arts organization. And you can ask them to be a fiscal sponsor. Don't feel like if you're looking for a fiscal sponsor, you have to kind of lock yourself into the arts and culture realm or the San Diego realm. Think beyond that, and those other organizations may be more accessible. So what is next? The application for CARES grant and the RFQ for OSP and CCSD are due November 13th. The guideline packets, again, are on the website and they contain everything you need. So this is the eligibility criteria, the RFQ questions and score guides, the RFP questions and score guides. So in our guidelines, we include both sets of questions, the questions that you're answering now as part of the RFQ, but also so that you can look ahead and see what kind of, if your project is a good fit, then you can look at the RFP and see what kind of questions we're going to ask you there. You can do that already because all of that is included in the PDF guidelines that we have on our website. And it also, as a part of that packet, is a list of dates to remember. All of this is due November 13th. We have a ton of webinars that we've already done during this application cycle, and they're all recorded and up on our website. We have a webinar where we go through each single section and question of the RFQ. And that's recorded. We have a webinar where we go through each single section and question of the CARES grant application. We have a webinar where we delve deep into fiscal sponsorships and the CCSD application. All of that is on our website. I encourage you to visit it and watch those videos. All the presentations are also on there as PDFs, but the webinars are helpful because it's me just yapping away about all of these things. And then if you have any questions about any of this or just want to ask, maybe you have a project in mind and you don't know which is a better opportunity for it, you can always contact myself or Carla at the Commission for Arts and Culture, and we're more than happy to set up office hours. You can sign up for existing office hours now. I think for this week before the deadline, we have Tuesday and Thursday, but if those hours don't work for you, you can let us know what time does work for you, and we're pretty flexible and can meet with you and walk you through any part of this application or the entire application with you. We're more than happy to do that. Something to remember, my little pro tip here, use the score guides. As part of the guidelines, we have a list of, it's called the tear sheet, that has all of the questions in the RFQ. And then it has a spreadsheet with all of the answers to the RFQ. So basically it's a list and it says, how many times does your board meet? And then there's 3 options: quarterly, monthly, or annually. And it says on there, if you answer quarterly or monthly, then you're qualified. If you answer annually, then you're not qualified. So even before you submit, this is the exact same score guides that the assessment team will use to assess whether your application is qualified or not qualified. Before you submit, you already know whether you're going to be deemed qualified or not qualified by how you answer those. So it's a good idea to look at those now and just make sure that you're kind of hitting all those marks and that the way that you're already doing things is qualified. And if it's not, then make yourself qualified so that you could be eligible for funding. Same thing with the RFP. We have all of the questions in the RFP, and then there's a guide that the panels will be using, the exact same document that the panels use to guide their conversation, we include in the guidelines. And this basically has all of the qualities of a strong application and all of the criteria that would lead to a high score. So as long as you're hitting all those marks and you're checking them off, then chances are your answers are going to be strong. So use the score guides. These are all the panels that we had. The recordings for all of these are available on our website, and you can sign up for 30-minute office hours to have a one-to-one conversation either on the phone or through Zoom with Carla and or myself. And now I can take any questions or comments. Sorry.
Leticia, we have some questions in the chat if you'll refer there. The first one from Bianca, and I'll read it. She says, can you specify which opportunities, or sorry, does the organization need to be an arts org? And I asked her to specify, and she said she's referring to the CARES funding. We are 501c3, although we're involved in arts and cultural activities. Our primary mission is community development through and with plants, botany, community farms, gardens, etc. We intentionally serve BIPOC communities, and it's BIPOC run. They're interested in applying for an arts project in one of the communities they work with, and they added, and just to reiterate, for the CARES grant, the project needs to occur in the city of San Diego, correct? So it's kind of 2 questions.
Yeah. So this is a good question, because then I can clarify, because it sounds already from your question like you're mixing up CARES with CCSD. So for CARES, you're not proposing a project. For CARES, we're only assessing your need, so that you were impacted by COVID-19, that your revenue was impacted, that you had to lay off people if you had to lay off people, and that you serve BIPOC communities and are rooted in BIPOC communities. But you're not proposing anything. We're not holding you to anything. This is just, it's relief funding. So if you're eligible and you get awarded, you'll get a check for $1,500, and then that's it. You just submit a small final report that says you spent the money. For CCSD, you are proposing a project. So for CCSD, for CARES Act, you do need to be an arts and culture nonprofit. You can make a case for being an arts and culture nonprofit, but it's easier if you are a bona fide arts and culture, primarily arts and culture nonprofit. So if you want to schedule a chat with me, and then we can kind of go over your mission statement and go over some of the characteristics that we look at to identify what a primarily arts and culture nonprofit is, we can do that, and then we can see if you're eligible to apply for CARES. For CCSD, you don't have to be an arts and culture nonprofit. You can apply as the nonprofit that you're describing, which sounds awesome. And if you are interested in putting together an arts and culture project within your organization, then yes, that would be a perfect example of a CCSD project, because your organization that focuses on like plants and stuff wants to do a cultural festival that, you know, maybe is focused on native plants and cultures and relationships to the land and whatever that is, and you want to apply for CCSD to fund that. And if that project is taking place in the city of San Diego, then that would be a perfect CCSD project. Did that answer that? Yes, I think it did.
And then we have a question from Angelica Tolentino, who said, what does it mean to match the funds? What are other methods for matching besides in-kind donations or quantifying donated time? And that's her first question.
That's a great question. So matching funds basically assures the city or any funder, most funding opportunities have a matching requirement. And this just assures the funder that you have support coming in from other sources. Very few funders will fund 100% of your project. So if you're receiving 25%, let's say in the case your project is going to cost $10,000, you're going to get $5,000 from the city. The city is going to expect you to match that with $5,000. That means that there's $5,000 coming in from another source, any other source. It just can't also be city funding. So let's say you got a grant from the California Arts Council, or even better, let's say you were going to have a festival and you rented out booths for vendors to sell food and arts and crafts, and each one of those booths was $100 and you rented out 20 of them. So already there, that's $2,000 for your match. And then you sold t-shirts and you made another couple $100. So that's all of that income, any revenue that is coming in from any source. It could be earned revenue or contributed revenue. It could be donations of funds could go towards your match. And then if your project budget is under 30,000, then you can match it, half of that with in-kind, which reduces how much money you're expected to have in cash. So this could be admission fees, concession sales, or other grants that you received from other sources.
Thank you, Leticia. Her second question, hopefully that answers Angelica. The second question she has was, also, as an individual artist, are there other deadlines or grant opportunities available from the city or from other organizations in the next coming months? Or is this the one window of opportunity for the whole year?
If you're an individual artist, you can apply with a fiscal sponsor to CCSD. You wouldn't be able to apply to OSP unless you yourself are a arts and culture nonprofit. And if there are any other funding opportunities, this other than whatever comes out of public art, and they have every now and then, there's no telling how many opportunities they'll have, but they have like they commission art works for the city's art collection. So for example, right now, I don't know if it already closed, but there was a Here Comes a Neighborhood, Here Comes a Neighborhood public art project happening in, I want to say, in Encanto neighborhood. And they were looking for 3 public art artists or art teams to apply for those commissions. So other than things like those, this would be the one window of opportunity to apply for funding for FY22. The next window will come at around this time next year to apply for FY23. So it may seem a little bit discouraging because you're applying now for things that are not happening until way on into the future in FY22. But if you can get your application together now, as part of the RFQ, you really only need to submit your project budget and like a 2-sentence description of what your project is going to be. And then you don't actually have to really get into the details of that until January, February when you're doing your RFP. So you have some time to really think it through and put all of the factors together before you have to submit your RFP. So I would encourage you to try, if you have a project in mind, I would encourage you to apply now, this round. Once you're in the funding pool, it's so much easier to continue applying. We also have an option to renew that we started in FY18. Basically, this means, let's say you have, you want to do an annual exhibition. Like I used to do the project application for the Dia de la Mujer exhibition in San Isidro at the front. And this is something that happened every year. And the mission of it was very consistent. The scope was very consistent year after year. So let's say I applied for that in FY22 and received funding. In FY23, I can request an option to renew, which would mean that I only have to submit my RFQ, and my RFP would be waived because they would be renewing my contract from the year before. And I could do that again in FY24. So I could go 2 years without having to submit an RFP again, which would save me a ton of time having to put all that narrative together. And then I would apply again with a full RFP in FY25. So again, another opportunity, once you're in the funding pool, that really just kind of makes it way easier for you to stay in there.
Leticia, I have a question for you as an arts organizer or individual artist who is interested in applying for the CCSD grant in order to utilize a nonprofit. As someone who's never done that, let's say I didn't know Dinah personally, what would you encourage someone to do? Would it be like reaching out with a proposal and an email to a nonprofit? Or maybe Dinah, has anyone ever asked you, if either one of you can answer this for some of us to get a better idea of like what the first step is, because it could seem a little intimidating to reach out and ask someone to sponsor you.
Well, I don't know if Dinah has any specific kind of experience to refer to, but yeah, I would encourage you to, before approaching your fiscal sponsor, to kind of summarize what the opportunity is, let them review the guidelines, and already have your proposal kind of ready so that there's an assurance on their end that their part of the work will be minimized. When you're asking someone to fiscal sponsor you, there is a certain share of work that they have to do for you. It isn't just kind of, here's my EIN number, use it. All of the kind of the insurance and all of that stuff that could be a little bit taxing, that's on them to have to collect. So there's a commitment on their part. So you want to make sure that you are doing your part to make that as easy as possible. So if that means having a summary of your proposal, having your budget ready, and then having a work distribution kind of calendar already done, and saying, hey, I'm really interested in applying for this. I would really appreciate your support as a 501c3. This is what the requirements are. This is a part that I would need your assistance with. If you're willing to do all that work for them, just say, these are the documents that I'm going to need from you. And then this is the work that I'm going to be putting in. And if awarded, the funds would be coming to you, and then I would be expecting the funds to then be transferred to me. If you wanted to arrange some kind of a, some project producers will, or some fiscal sponsors will require like a 10% administrative fee or something like that. That's all things that you would want to talk with your fiscal sponsor up front. But yeah, I think there are ways, and it can be intimidating when approaching a fiscal sponsor, but know that fiscal sponsors who are 501c3s, particularly ones that are located in your communities, are already very invested in your communities and would love to be able to claim some of the stuff that you're doing in their kind of repertoire of work that they're doing as well. So a lot of fiscal sponsors would be happy to support you as long as you have it together enough that it doesn't make them feel like, oh great, now I have to do all of this other work too.
For example, for me, I got the California Art Council grant for this year. I partnered with the Oceanside Public Library for our paper cut zine club and our exhibition workshops, and I already had a relationship with them. So it's interesting because starting this organization, you kind of like align yourself with those you work best with, and you have to like literally think about what are your standards of like quality, you know, work that you expect from your partnership. And also if you guys share like the vision for the project, which really helps, because then you trust your fiscal agent to not like double dip in the money and not show up and do their emails and whatever admin work they're supposed to do on their end. For me, it was a go-to for me to go to Oceanside Public Library because they were one of our first partners that linked up with us to do something small for like after school programming. So it made sense. And then there's like also local people I work with who do own 501c3, and we've worked together in the past, and it's just, I go to where I've been supported. So like, for example, if you know of an institution or some type of like business chamber or like Main Street organization, if you worked with those type of, you know, institutions in your community, most likely they are 501c3, and most likely they say yes to partnering with you. So I always suggest that you go where you're welcomed, you know, and you go where those values are shared.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would add, or rather reiterate that to look at this not like you're asking for something, but it's a partnership. You're building partnerships and you're approaching an organization with a partnership proposal because they're going to get something out of it as well. And you're going to get something out of it. So don't feel like it's not your place or like you're asking for charity from a charity. like you're asking for something, you know, like look at it as you are providing a service that is needed. There is a roadblock for you to currently be able to access a resource that you should be able to access, and they can facilitate that for you. So really you're asking to partner up with them to provide these services for a community that you're both invested in.
That's a good way to look at it. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have other questions?
Not a question, but I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing this information and making it so accessible and understandable for us to move and grow from. So yeah, just thank you so much, Leticia and Dinah, for doing this because it's really helpful.
You're very welcome. My contact information is on here, and our website. Like I said, we have these recorded when we go like deep into the RFQ. But if you have any questions, if you want to talk about the RFP, if you have any questions at all, want to go question by question through the process with myself or Carla, do reach out to us. We are literally, this is all we're doing all week, and our main goal and wish is to get as many new organizations into the funding pool as possible. And if you look through the RFQ and it looks a little daunting, just give us a call and we can help you walk you through it. Because once you're in, you're in. It basically, the way that the funding algorithm works is at least in the years that I've been here, 99% of the organizations that apply get funding. So it is in your best interest to sit down, fill out the RFQ, reach out to us if you have any questions, and just get it submitted. Submit the RFP, and once you're in, you can do the option to renew, and you can get your project funded for 3 years, and then continue growing from that. It's very needed resources. A lot of times we're so used to using our community networking and kind of making do with what we have and making magic with little. But the truth is that these resources are out here, and they're for you. So you should be taking advantage of them.
Thank you so much, too. Can I also ask one last question to Angelica? I'm a San Diego native, but I just recently relocated back here from New York. I know of like an organization that provides fiscal sponsorship to artists called Fractured Atlas, but it's based in New York. Would I be able to apply using them for a CCSD? But they're based somewhere else. But my project would be based here. I'm based here now.
Yeah. You can. We've heard of a Fractured Atlas. Yes, because there is no requirement that your fiscal sponsor or that the applying organization be based in the city of San Diego, and currently there are no parameters for where that organization should be based. Then yeah, it doesn't matter that they're based out of New York, as long as the project that you're producing is happening here in San Diego.
Okay, thank you.
And then something to note that I didn't mention, for CCSD, each organization can only apply once, which means that each fiscal sponsor can really only fiscal sponsor one project. But for CARES, you can fiscal sponsor, if you were to be a fiscal sponsor, you can fiscal sponsor as many nonprofit arts and culture organizations that are not 501c3s as you want. So as a fiscal sponsor for CARES, you can fiscal sponsor multiple CARES applications. So that's good to know if you happen to be blessed with a 501c3 status and you know of arts and culture nonprofits, to encourage them to apply. And the kind of what we're asking of fiscal sponsors for CARES is not at all like what we're asking for in CCSD. For CARES, you're basically just submitting your 501c3 letter, and that's it. We're not asking you for financials. We're not asking you for governance and all this other stuff. We're not asking that of the fiscal sponsors. So it's a much simpler application, and the ask from a nonprofit arts and culture organization that does not have a 501c3 to their fiscal sponsor would be minimal.
So for example, Hill Street, a lot of artists can apply for the CARE through me. Like I can have more than like 5 artists apply and use me as a fiscal agent.
Kind of. Yes, you can have multiple entities apply and use you as a fiscal agent, but it's important to remember that the CARES Grant Initiative is not meant for artists, but for arts nonprofits. So if each one of these artists has an arts nonprofit type, like let's say it's a gallery that runs like a nonprofit, they could apply through you with your 501c3.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the rigidness of what constitutes a nonprofit is not it's not so black and white with the CARES grant. So basically, the only questions that they ask is that this nonprofit have like a governing board. So if you have an advisory board that comes together once a month or once every other month to talk about your projects and programs, and you're not a for-profit, art gallery, then that could be enough to constitute you as a nonprofit arts organization without a 501c3. Okay. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of our cultural happenings and a lot of our cultural spaces are run on alternative methods, not necessarily institutionalized 501c3s. And we're doing it in different ways, but we're making it happen. And so this is an opportunity to take that kind of ambiguity that you have as a space and use it to your benefit to kind of access some of these relief funds.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, I don't see any more questions. No one has their hands up or unmuted. I think we're good. So don't forget, do you have the next slide?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. If you have any,
Thank you.
thank you so much. This was so needed. Maybe we can do one a little earlier for the following year, and maybe like a step process with the RFP and reading it and understanding it. I sat on, what was the panel that you had me sit on that you invited me to?
The Arts Education Enrichment Initiative.
That was an eye-opening experience for me, you guys. Like literally all these organizations that are already in the system apply for this money, and then they all show up and they listen to us decide on, like, I guess we rate it, and we discuss it out loud as a panel. And then if you're there and then your project and your organization comes up and you want to say something that you feel that needs to be said before we make a final decision, you have an opportunity to like represent your organization and your project. It's pretty democratic, I think, and especially knowing that once you're in the system, you have a 99% chance of getting funding. Like, it doesn't hurt to sit down for maybe a few hours here and there just to complete the contract process, just so you could just be in there forever. Just invest a little time so you could be in there forever. It doesn't hurt. It's a lot less hustling if you could do that.
Yeah, one of the important things that we were talking about earlier was this idea that writing a grant forces you to put your project into language, into writing, and contextualize what you're doing and who you're doing it with, and really think about the impact and who your collaborators and partners are and your strengths. So just the process of sitting down and formalizing that language for yourself is really important. And once you do it for one grant, it's really the same stuff you're submitting to all the other grants. So it's a good step in the right direction to create short-term and long-term sustainability. Short-term survival, but long-term sustainability. And we really have to start looking at how to put ourselves at those tables, and how to start talking and bringing our projects to the forefront so they're recognized and they're funded just like everything else is. Our stuff, our communities deserve funding, our projects deserve funding, our art spaces deserve funding, but we're not going to get it unless we apply for it. So it's a good start. There's good people at the commission. I'm here, whether I'm employed by the city or after. I will continue. It is my life's mission to continue supporting, advocating, and demystifying this whole process. I really went to work for the city because before I worked for the city, I was a grant writer for a small arts nonprofit. I worked at Casa Familiar in San Isidro, and I was really confused about why we only got $5,000 every year, and you had all these other organizations getting all these big bucks, and I didn't understand. And once I went to work for the city, I learned about the algorithm and about how budgets work and about how the application process works, and it was really illuminating. But I always say it should not take somebody having to work for the city to know these things. So if we're not doing these things that we're doing right now, educating, conversing, dialoguing, demystifying, then things will always remain as confusing as they were for me then. If there's anything that I can do is share all the knowledge that I've gained while I've been there, whether I'm there or I'm not there. That'll continue to be a tool that I have now, right, in my tool bag. So if I can help anyone else kind of navigate this process, I am always available. So hit me up this week before the deadline. But if you have questions after that regarding the RFP or for future funding opportunities, you can always count on me as an advocate and a supporter. And there's still amazing staff at the city. Carla's amazing. Jonathan, our new executive director, is amazing. everyone there is ready and really committed to getting new organizations into our funding pool, particularly BIPOC organizations.
Thank you everyone for attending. This is recorded, so it will be on Facebook. If you need to go back and, you know, hear it again and take some notes, it will be on Facebook, so it's all recorded. Once again, follow us on Instagram at the Hill Street Country Club. Go to our website, join our email list. So, you know, when we have future workshops or talks, please sign up. So once again, thank you everyone. Thank you, Leticia. I really appreciate you. Everyone,
Thank
have a
you.
good day.